Chag Sameach. As we prepare for Yizkor, which will be in a few more minutes, I have been reflecting on memory and storytelling, which we both take very seriously as Jews. A few days ago at the Seder, we told the story of Passover in the Magid section. And there are many different versions of the Magid section. I don't know if this works, but 2 Jews, 3 Haggadot. There are a lot of different versions throughout our lives. We have different versions. I can still picture the Haggadah that I learned as a child in school. And, we had to each memorize our parts. And I still remember that version of the story. This year, one of our little 5-year-old cousins brought a book that he hand-painted in pre-K, and he read aloud this version of the story at our Seder. And that version was not the same as the version that I memorized and not the same as other versions. What I've learned is that for kids today, frogs play a big role in the story, a lot bigger of a role than in the Torah. And that's great. But hearing his little voice reminded me that our stories are still alive, even these really ancient stories. And part of why they're still alive is because we keep telling them. This time of year on Pesach, we also become storytellers in other ways. We become Maggidim in other ways. Today, on the last day of the festival, when we recite Yizkor to remember our lost loved ones, I hope for us that we can become their storytellers too. Even if it's hard some years, even if it's painful, our wise tradition teaches that we should remember our loved ones at least 5 times a year. So that's 4 times at Yizkor and on their yahrzeit, on the anniversary of their death. So we light a candle, we say a prayer, which, like I said, we will in a few minutes. And I want to add one more charge for us. Light a candle, say a prayer, tell a story. Telling these kinds of stories can be maybe unexpectedly hard. A while ago, I was meeting with a family in the days before a funeral. And I spoke to one sibling first about how to eulogize their mom. She began gushing over her mother's many accomplishments. She ran this and she did this. She worked here. She organized this. She received this award for this many years. And all in all, she had been a wonderful person and a mom. And at that moment, we got a little interrupted because her brother texted, who was going to join us. And I saw her face change. She suddenly looked distraught. And she warned me that her brother's version of their mother's life, her brother's version of events, would not match her own. And she didn't want me to be surprised. She said her mother could be, and there was a pause, complicated. We all know, right? We all know what that means. Everyone's complicated. But when someone says a relationship was complicated, and she worried that her brother would say worse than complicated, and that the picture of their mother would then be incoherent at the funeral. And I can still see that look of concern in her eyes. And I assured her, it's okay if there are varied accounts. It's okay for her brother to give an authentic eulogy, even though they had some kind of a fraught relationship. And in the end, she accepted what we all know deep down, that our truth is not the only truth, that our story is not the only version of the story, and that even if we're telling stories about our closest people and our closest relationships, there is no perfect storyteller. Because, as we know, humans are not tape recorders, and we're not iPhone cameras. And because we know, storytelling is an act of creation and interpretation. They're human. It's human. Remembering transforms us, and our act of remembering also changes the story as it's told through our lips. And as I reassured this mourning daughter, it's okay for the story to depend on the teller. And it's good for us to bring ourselves into this process of remembering. I'm looking ahead also this week to Yom HaShoah. And so for us to also look ahead to Yom HaShoah, which is only in a few days, will be Wednesday night and Thursday, Israel's Holocaust Remembrance Day. And looking ahead, we have more storytelling to do. As you may know, I am the granddaughter of a Holocaust survivor. And I was raised by a second-generation survivor. And we have both, my father and I, always worried about the future of Holocaust testimony, Holocaust storytelling. What will we do when there are no more survivors to give those first-person accounts that are so effective and so moving? I worry that the stories told by my father and by me, the second and third generation, will be ineffective compared to the original. We won't always have the original. What if I mix up details or mispronounce names? And I will, and I have. So why would anyone want to listen to me? My grandfather's complete original testimony is fully recorded and archived. Some might say we don't need to hear the stories of the Shoah year after year. We have them put away somewhere safe. And I worry too about Holocaust deniers. What if my imperfect story hurts the credibility of my grandfathers? What if one day neither of us is believed? Maybe better to keep his words behind glass in a museum or printed in his book, which we donated to libraries and archives, which, are under threat in a whole other way on their own these days. But my other worry of these many is that if I don't tell his story in my voice, if I don't keep it alive, flowing through my veins and on my lips and in my heart, then one day, what if really no one cares anymore? If the stories are no longer alive? It is a unique experience to hear survivors speak about the atrocities that they knew firsthand. And thank God we didn't know them firsthand. But it's still on us to tell their stories and hope that people will listen long after they're gone and long after we're gone. To that end, there is an incredible program of the JCRC called Magid. Has anyone heard of this program? Okay. Magid, of course, means storyteller. And in this program, there are professionals who train the children of Holocaust survivors in public speaking and help them to craft a presentation to share their parents' testimony. So help them to become not only storytellers, but good storytellers, effective storytellers. As each speaker becomes a Magid, they step into the experience of their loved one, learning how to speak when the survivor themselves has no more voice to offer. This Tuesday evening here at Bethel, our own Sharon Pohoriles will speak as a Magid, or a Magida in the feminine. She'll speak for her father. A few words she shared in advance. Ludwig Louis Pohoriles was born in 1937 in Lvov, Poland, which is now Ukraine. In 1939, when Germany invaded Poland, he was just 2 years old. He spent most of the war from age 4 or 5 until he was 8, pretending that he was a Polish Catholic child. And by the end of the war, he was hiding in plain sight in Germany. So if you want to hear the rest of that story, please come on Tuesday evening at 7 o'clock to hear Sharon's presentation. And I'll add here that this isn't even written down, which is that that is one Holocaust story. There are so many, and unfortunately, we don't have survivors like my grandfather anymore who were teenagers, and we don't have survivors, or maybe we have very few. We don't have survivors who were adults who had those other life experiences of the Shoah. The survivors who were able to speak today were children. So that's one Holocaust story. So we've already lost that first person account for other types of Holocaust stories, and we already need to have second and third generation survivors already taking on telling those stories. Okay. I know you've heard me say this before, but it is not just on the children and grandchildren of survivors to tell the stories. It's on all of us to become Maggidim, to become those storytellers for the Jewish people. Not like we're doing some family a favor because they need some help, but it's taking on an obligation for all of us. Like we do every year at the Seder, and like we will do for Yom HaShoah, we have to learn to do as our survivors are less and less able to speak for themselves. We have to become those storytellers. So if you are telling a Holocaust story this year in some way, or listening to one, and if for whatever reason it feels like you're not quite getting it, you feel uncomfortable, maybe you're doing your best, but you know it wouldn't be as good as if the survivor themselves were telling it. Maybe a little imposter syndrome, a version of that. Do your best to tell the story anyway. Tell the story anyway. We need to tell the stories anyway. And for a close family loss, so many of us are here today for Yizkor. So thinking especially as we recite Yizkor, even if you aren't clear on every detail of your loved one's life, or even if you can't pronounce all the names of all the figures in the story or the cities, even if each person in the family has a slightly different version of the story, tell the story anyway. This is the time to do that. Each of us becomes a Maggid for the loved ones we've lost at their funerals and throughout their lives. And it's okay for the stories to change as they come through us, as we will no doubt change through them. We still keep telling. So this Yizkor, I pray that we say their names and light a candle like we always do, but that we also tell some of their stories, but not like we're taking a history exam or testifying before Congress, but like they're ours to tell, because they are. Zichronam livracha, may their memories always be a blessing.